Welcome back to A Good Pour. I'm Kathryn Good. We're having conversations about good work. Today we have Sonya Manfred with the Sumner County CASA here today. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So glad you're here. Sumner County CASA does really, really important work, and I think people know it's there and know like you're doing something with kids in the judicial system, but really have a hard time because a lot of it you can't talk about, right? So I'm just so excited to have you here so people can learn a little bit more. When we're not in an event or not at, the kind of distracting, just we get to hear just from you about the important work you're doing. So will you tell us about Sumner County CASA?
I'd love to. So I work with an organization called Sumner County CASA. CASA stands for Court Appointed Special Advocates. And that's a lot of words to say we have volunteers who become experts in the children that we serve. Our children come to us in a way that no one really likes to talk about, that you don't hear a lot about, or when you hear about it, it's in the news and it's sensationalized. But what people don't understand is the things that you see happening on the news are happening to kids here in Sumner County. There are currently 142 children in Sumner County who are in custody, and CASA is serving 135 of them. And serving kids looks different depending on what brought our kids into custody.
Will you define custody?
Okay. Yeah. There's a lot of different ways we define custody right now with the Department of Children's Services. The children that we serve have been brought before juvenile court in a petition where there are allegations of abuse or neglect, and the Department of Children's Services is involved. And our Judge Howard, and our magistrate, it's not Begley anymore.
No, I didn't know that.
No, it's not Begley. And our magistrate see all of our kids, and they make the decision when CASA should get involved. And once that happens, we are court ordered, so we become a party to the case. And what that gives us is the access to the child, DCS meetings, all of the court hearings. But what we do is we ask our volunteers to become experts in the children. What most people probably don't have a lot of a time in juvenile court. It's not some place you're just like, hey, let's go to juvenile court and see what happens. But juvenile court is adults who are making decisions about children. And what we do is stand those children up in the courtroom, and we give those children a voice. Because this is probably one of the most traumatic times in a child's life, to be removed from your family, because your family is not safe, or that your family just can't be what they need to be at that moment. And so what happens is we train community volunteers, anyone over the age of 21 who wants to become a CASA, we work to get you trained. They go through 30 hours of training, and then we appoint them to a child. And what they do is become experts. They see the child at least monthly. And that seems pretty easy to do until you realize that the majority of our kids are not placed in Sumner County. We don't have enough foster homes in Sumner County. So we have kids placed in West Tennessee as far as Memphis. We have kids in Clarksville. We have kids who are in placements outside of the state. And so our volunteers really step up and fill that gap in our kids. And they stay with our kids from appointment until the time the case is closed. So while an attorney may change or a DCS worker may change, once our CASAs accept a case, they stay on the case until the case closes. So until our child reaches permanence.
So there's a lot of different agencies involved between a judge, DCS, CASA. Can you talk, what's a typical scenario? Like, is it a parent is in jail or incarcerated, or is it, I know you deal with all kinds of things, but just to help people understand kind of the process of what, because a lot of times people think of juvenile court and the child is in trouble.
Right.
That's not what we're talking about, right? So, or at least most of the time.
Well, all the children that we serve are on the dependency neglect side. So our children are not the kids that are on the juvenile justice side.
Okay. So maybe start from like a typical situation and just talk about how the different agencies have to get involved, because you don't deal with foster placement, right?
If our child is in a foster placement.
But you don't
Yes, but we don't place children.
them. Right.
No.
Right.
So I guess the easiest way for people to understand how CASA works is in Tennessee, we're mandated reporters. So we are, if you see something, say something where children are involved. So that could be a doctor's office, that could be a school, that could be just a layperson, that could be a friend who just knows, hey, something's not right, and they tell someone. And once that child comes to the attention of the Department of Children's Services, they have two different sides. They have the CPS side, which is the Child Protective Services side. And that's the side that generally goes out and investigates any allegations.
Okay.
And so once that happens, once a child comes to the department, and the department finds that there is neglect or abuse, then they have to file a petition within juvenile court. And so when I started with CASA about 10 years ago, most of our children came into custody. If they came to the attention of the department, they ended up coming into custody, into foster care, into placement. And what we're seeing now is the department is using lots of other avenues so that we don't disrupt children. And so while it may not be safe to be at home with mom and dad, aunt, grandma, friend of the family, there's a kinship placement that we can place with so that we don't change our school.
Right.
We don't have to leave our friends. We don't have to quit playing on the sports teams that we play on because we're going to be placed in Clarksville. And if you get moved to Clarksville, you can't very well play on your high school team in Gallatin, right?
Right.
So what we are seeing is a lot more of what we call safety placements or kinship placements. So our kids are staying local, but for those kids who don't have those options, we just don't have enough. We don't have enough foster homes in Sumner County.
It's basically an open foster placement across the state.
The department has what they call placement, and when a child comes in, whether they come in at 8:00 in the morning or midnight, someone from placement is looking for a place to take those children. What we're finding is if you can't find a placement, our kids are going night to night. So for like a lot of our older kids, especially during the summer, if there wasn't school for them to go to during the day, they were at the DCS office or they were at a night-to-night placement because we just don't have the space in Sumner County for our kids to have placement closer to home.
So if a child in Sumner County is in custody, the Department of Children's Services, I guess, is dealing with all of that.
The Department of Children's Services decides placement.
Okay. So they place, let's just say they have to place in Memphis.
Right.
Because they are from Sumner County, they would get a Sumner County CASA volunteer.
Correct.
And that volunteer may or does have to go to Memphis.
That volunteer does. We have a lot of ways to sort of work around that. We're so lucky now that you have the ability to FaceTime and you have Zoom. And so when a volunteer can't make it to Memphis, we still have those options. Okay. We have a sibling group of 3 that is placed in West Tennessee right now, and our volunteer Zooms with them once or twice a month.
So what does it mean to be an expert? I mean, of course, with any relationship, it takes time. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to be an expert in that child's life, there's got to be some sort of relationship. Right. How long does that typically take? And I know every case is different between, a child being willing to open up or, the trauma that they've endured and space or time, all of those things. But what do you see, I guess, is important in that relationship development early on for that volunteer and child?
I think for our volunteers, it's just becoming a constant. That person that they know they're going to see or they can have access to, especially with our older kids. Our volunteers generally, they get their cell phone numbers. And so with older kids, they're texting. And so you have to sort of meet them where they are. With any teenager,
yes, right?
As with any teenager, right? And with our younger kids, it looks more like a lot of play. Like when you meet them, ask them about their day and let them show you their toys and those kinds of things that make them comfortable. Because a lot of times our kids are not going to share those things they think they're not supposed to tell until they're comfortable.
Yeah.
And so with our younger kids, it looks a lot like reading with them, playing with them, asking them really innocuous questions like, hey, what'd you do today? What's your favorite subject at school? Did you get to do anything fun at school today? And so building that camaraderie and that relationship with the kids goes a long way, because our kids are averaging about a year. We're on those cases a year. So in a year, our volunteers have a lot of time to learn a lot of things about those kids.
So they're going and being an advocate in the court. What does that look like, in the decisions that are being made on the court side?
Right. So juvenile court is a bunch of adults. It's a misnomer. You very rarely have the children present. And so our volunteers, part of what they do as a CASA is they write reports. Depending on how long we are between hearings or where we are with adjudications or preliminary hearings or those kinds of things, our volunteers still meeting with those children and seeing those children at least monthly. And so when it's time to go before the court, our volunteers write a report. And that report has everything from every time they saw the child, what they talked about, the conversations with the parents, the conversations with the foster placements or the kinship placements. And then we have concerns. And our concerns may be, that this child needs some therapy. We need to get this child into some mental health therapy, or before we take the next step in the process, we think there needs to be family therapy, or the child needs tutoring. All of those things, our volunteers find out what our children need, and then we share that with the court. I always like to say our volunteers stand our kids up in front of the court when they're not there.
You think that child's there, but they're not. That's a huge, even I, as long as I've worked with you, I still think of that child in the courtroom. So I'm so glad you said that.
Yeah, because it's not a really good use of time to bring a child from Memphis to sit in court for 5 or 6 hours for the 2 or 3 minutes they're before the judge. They don't get a lot of time. So as much as we can do and as much as information as we can provide before that, we try to, so that everyone in the case knows this is what's going on. These are the concerns that CASA has. And we try to get those things taken care of. And sometimes it's handled in court, but then sometimes it's handled with DCS and meetings. And so what we tell our volunteers, because it's really daunting to think, hey, I'm going to go through 30 hours of training and then I'm going to tell attorneys and judges what I think is best for a child. We don't leave them by themselves. Every volunteer, before they take their first case, is paired with a volunteer who's been around for a while, or one of the three of us. We're a 3-person staff, and so one of the three of us will go visit. We'll help them on that first case until they're ready to sort of do it on their own. And we are present for every court hearing and every meeting. So our volunteers are not just sort of chucked into the deep end. Yeah. We try to make sure that they know that they can contact us anytime. We're all available 24/7 on the weekends, because what we hope is that our volunteers are seeing their families after school and on the weekends, because we hope that our kids are in school and we hope that our parents are working. Mm-hmm. And so if we're asking our volunteers to do the work after 4:00 and on Saturday and Sunday, then the three of us are present so that if something happens, they can always get one of us.
I want to talk more about your small but mighty team of 3, but are there any kind of common traits that if someone's listening to this and it's like, I could be good at this, or is it just...
I think we have just a huge array of people who are volunteers. We have retired couples that come and advocate together. We have people who have social work backgrounds. We have people who have psychology backgrounds, teachers, just anyone who sort of feels led to advocate or really has an affinity for kids. Those are the people who come to us. We try very, very hard to make sure that they don't feel like they're just out on an island by themselves, because the work that we do is hard. One of the things that in our interview process, we always make sure that our volunteers have support, because you're going to hear things and you're going to see things that you think only happen on TV or they don't happen in Sumner County. That stuff doesn't happen in Gallatin or Hendersonville. And so we try to make sure that our volunteers are prepared to sort of process those things. One of the things I always tell volunteers when I meet them for the first time is like, you have to have a box. And when it's time, you take your case out and you open your box and you do all of those things that you need to do for your CASA child. And then when that's over, you put that back in your box and you put your box on the shelf. And then you have to be present for your family and for your life. Because if you get completely sucked in to what's happening to those kids, you're not going to be a good advocate for them.
Or helping
and
yourself.
You're not going to be healthy for yourself. And so we try to really, really make sure that our volunteers know that there's support there. If you are if you're not sure if you should say something, call us. We usually, I personally, we try to make sure that if you're going to have a very hard conversation, we try to make that conversation come from us, because we want our volunteers to continue to have that open communication with the families and the people in the court. Right. So if someone's going to get mad at someone, let them get mad at me.
Sure.
I want you to still talk to your volunteer, but you can be mad because Sonya or Amy or Laura said, no, we can't do that.
Right. Talk about, your team hasn't grown, but
No.
your number of cases has. Is it really growth in our community, or are there other things driving the number of increased cases?
I think, yes, that we've had a lot of growth in our county, but I think what drives our numbers is kids have access now.
Thankfully.
They do. And a lot of people think, social media and kids are not a great thing. But my perspective is, when we were kids, it was like, you don't talk about home. Whatever is at home is at home. You don't share. But now, because kids have such unfettered access to each other and they don't censor themselves and they tell everything, I think it's not that we have more kids being abused and neglected. It's that people notice now. And children themselves are like, what's happening at my house is not what's happening at other people's houses. And there may be something wrong with that. So they're talking more. They're telling friends. They're telling teachers. They're telling their guidance counselor. And so that is leading to an increase in the number of cases that are getting reported, because kids are now talking. It's
Right.
not taboo to talk about what's happening or not happening at home. And so I feel like that is that's me. I feel like that is one of the reasons that our numbers have increased in the time that I've been with CASA. And I also feel like, because there are so many options for support, I feel like that is why we are seeing more reunifications than we have seen in the past.
Yeah. Talk about the adoption, because they don't all end up in adoption.
No.
They can reunify. Mm-hmm. I mean, lots of different stories. But adoption is something we celebrate.
Yes.
So talk about that part of it.
So permanence, we want our kids to find permanence. And permanence can look different. If I told you 10 kids, 10 cases, permanence would be different in all 10 of them. Not every time can we go back home to mom and dad. But when we can't, we try to find safe and stable permanence for those children. And that was like adoption, which we celebrate our adoptions, but we also celebrate our kids going back home. We celebrate reunification in the same way we celebrate adoption. But sometimes they end up where our older kids, they don't necessarily want to be adopted. Our 16, 17-year-olds a lot of times will be, I don't want to be adopted, but I know I'm not going home.
And I need a safe place.
So the department has things in place that they can use for those kids. We have something called subsidized permanent guardianship. And then we have something called a permanent living arrangement, where our kids may not exit custody to a family member or a friend, but they may stay in their foster home. But the case with DCS is no longer open.
Okay.
And so we look for permanence, and it's not traditional permanence that everyone thinks, oh, they're going to go back home to mom and dad. We want our kids to end up in the safest place possible for them. So we like to find them and leave them better than we found them. And so that looks very different. We could have 4 cases close next week, and none of them look the same.
Yeah.
it makes it hard sometimes because kids want to go home. And it takes a while, especially for our younger kids, to understand that maybe going home was not what's best for them.
Yeah. So let's talk about your team. You're almost an advocate for the advocates,
right?
You know, like, so you are, you know, like I always tell my daughter, you can always blame anything on me. And it sounds like you're doing the same thing for your advocates. You know, as being, you'll be the bad guy, you'll deal with the hard things. And there's a ton of paperwork.
There's a lot.
As any, you know, really government, judicial service, you know, there just has to be. What else kind of goes on in your day-to-day with your team of 3?
Well, generally, there are times when we're all in meetings at the same time about different cases. We have to, I think the funniest part of what we do is the fact that we have 135 kids that we're advocating for right now, and we have to know 135 kids. I freely admit I'm the last one. If you have a question, it's going to be Amy or Laura. They're the ones. Laura, if I walked in right now and I said, hey, when is the next hearing on X case? She could look at me and tell me. I'm flicking through the calendar, doing a Google search. But that's what makes it work. We all have strengths in different areas. And so we know that if a certain situation is coming up, or a certain hearing or a certain thing needs to happen, who's going to be the person that takes that. But our volunteers know that there's 3 of us, and if you call and Laura doesn't answer, call Amy. If Amy doesn't answer, call Sonya. One of us is going to answer or get back to you.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it work for us. Everyone's really, really good at what they do, and they get it on a daily basis. I don't have to ask questions. It's done. If the department needs something, the department reaches out. If court needs something, they reach out, and they know that if they get one of the 3 of us, we're going to get the answer that they need, or we're gonna find what we need to get for them.
Strong team. I'd love to see you be able to add a couple more. Just, I mean, I know y'all are you just work so hard and do such good work, but it's exhausting.
Yes,
I know
it is. But you know, we have our little team of 3, and we, you know, plan to in the next year add one. But that always makes you nervous because it works, and we want to continue to have it work like it does. So whoever we bring in is going to have to really, really, really fit.
Yeah. Talk to me about misconceptions about the kids that you're assisting, that you're advocating for.
Our kids. A lot of people have a sort of picture that comes to mind when you think about a kid that's involved with DCS. And what I tell people is the kids that we serve go to school with our kids. They play sports with our kids. They are in band. They cheer. They're in dance. All the things that your kids do, our CASA kids do. They just have the unfortunate time in their life where the departments had to get involved because things are not safe for them at home. The number of kids we serve looks just like the population of our county. We serve kids in every city in Sumner County. Most of our kids right now are from Hendersonville, with Gallatin and Westmoreland coming in 2nd and 3rd. And most of our kids right now, we sort of have an ebb and a flow, but most of our kids are 0 to 10 or 11. We have a few older kids, but we're seeing lots of younger kids come in because we started Safe Baby Court here in Sumner County. And so that's our 0 to 3 court. And so we have several Safe Baby cases that we are working right now. And those children are children who were born drug exposed. By and large, those are Safe Baby kids. And so then that comes with a whole nother medical side that we have to keep up with, because those kids sometimes have delays and sometimes end up needing a little more help because they were born drug exposed.
Mm-hmm. Any other things you just wish people knew about CASA?
I know that people will call us and do an application and then they don't believe they're ready. For people who are interested, call and ask the hard questions. We're going to tell you it's not easy work, but when you have that kid who 2 years after your case closes sends you an invitation to their graduation, or lets you know that they made the dance team, or sends you first day of school pics, those are things that you can't put a price on, that you had the chance to affect a child, and to make a child feel like there was someone who was there for them. I always ask when I have a case, in a perfect world, what would your life look like right now? Because that's the easiest way to see where the child is in the process. And a lot of kids are really more in tune than you think they are. Yeah. And so I would say to someone, if you thought about CASA, if you thought about getting involved, just call us. Ask us the hard questions. We're going to tell you. We will share what kind of kids we serve and where we serve.
Well, and it can be a seed for later involvement, right? Like sometimes, especially with a large commitment, especially a commitment that's 30 hours on the front end, it does take some mental prep and some prayer and some, am I ready for this? And so I really like that you say that, because if they just call and ask the questions, at least they've opened the door for something that they may want to do at some point.
And we've had people who have put in an application, and then when it's time for that class to start, they're like, I'm not ready. But we stay in contact with them. We reach out every time we have a class that starts, and then they get there. Yeah. We're about to start a class right now of about 10, and then we have probably another 10 applications that we'll have to interview. Okay. And so we'll have another class later in the fall. But we need if you're interested, we need volunteers. We're at about 30, 35 active volunteers. We have several who just finished cases who sort of need a minute to regroup before they come back and get a new case. But there are other ways other than being CASA than that to support Sumner County CASA. We're looking for people interested in board service, people to attend our events, people to just reach out and share our things on social media. You don't have to be a CASA to support us. There's so many ways that you can help us get our message out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're doing, just needed work. It is good work, but it's work that has to be done for the protection of our children and to give them the safest home possible. Right. I think anytime we bring in the court or government, things get confusing, and there's things we can't talk about, and there's things we don't understand. But I just really want people to understand at least what being a CASA looks like, right?
Yes. And the 30 hours, sounds daunting at the beginning, but it's all done online via Zoom at your own pace. We do a lot of one-on-ones before we get you sworn in, and you literally are sworn in by the juvenile court judge. You swear an oath to be a CASA, and you accept cases. And so we make sure that the training is broken down into bite-sized pieces that don't make it too overwhelming. And then once you're sworn in, we don't just say go forth and advocate. We pair you with a veteran advocate or one of us until you're comfortable doing it by yourself.
Okay, one last question. Okay. The raffle seems to be like the hottest ticket in town. Just talk about the raffle. It happens in March.
Raffle's in March. Tickets will go on sale late November.
And, you basically get a chance to win.
Somebody's winning $10,000 that night. And it's a lot of fun. You don't have to be present to win. We sell 200 tickets at $150 a ticket. And you don't want to be the first person out. You want to be the last person out. And that person will win $10,000. And then during the raffle, we give smaller prizes. We call them the money balls. And you can win a money ball for $150, $300, or $500. And so we have a lot of fun that night. The room is usually packed. Everybody's having a good time. I think in the last 3, we've only had one time where they wanted to draw all the way down to the last ball. And
because when it gets to
we'll stop it at 10. And if those 10 people are in the room and want to split, we'll split there. If they don't, we draw down to 5. And then we're down to 5 people left in. We'll ask after each draw. So, the last time we got down to the 2 who were left, and one wanted to split, and the other said, I'm either going home with all of it or nothing. And he ended up going home with all of it.
well,
So it's a lot of fun. We have fun that
personalities come out.
Oh
for
yeah,
sure.
oh definitely, definitely.
It's fun to watch.
Definitely.
I don't think I've ever gotten past. I think one time maybe I was at the top 30, but
Maybe, yeah.
not anywhere close to the top.
It's one of those nights you don't have to be present. So when we get down to that 5 and someone's not in the room, like we're on the phone, like, hey, you better answer, because if you would have split and we can't get you and you get drawn out, well then, sorry. But it's probably my favorite event that we do. It might go to second place. We're doing Breakfast with Santa in December, and I do love Santa, so it might have to fight, right? We might have to fight for my favorite event, but Breakfast with Santa in December is going to be fun as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being here. Thanks for just explaining in everyday language. You do this really well, just how people can get involved, but also just really what's going on and why it's needed. So thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.